think this will come under the heading of the less formal portion of the service. With the radio stations that Coach Coughenour will listen to later in life, this would be the 15 minutes of bluegrass at the end of the classical music. We were coming back from fishing about 5 years ago, and Coach Coughenour said, Clark said, I'd like for you to do my eulogy. He said, because you'll make it funny. Well, I didn't prepare for it because he was the cleanest living human. I really thought he'd outlive me by 10 or 15 years. So, this talk's going to be about as organized as Tom Coughenour was. Who is the only man I know that makes Bob Bingham look organized. He told me the year that he was demoted to assistant principal that his desk would get so full of referrals that occasionally he would scoot the trash can over and just knock them off into the trash can. Matter of fact, one day he asked me to come in his office and he said, Clark, my back's turned. How about knocking a few things off my desk? And I did. I think there were a couple still left there from whenever I was a student. Those of you who knew the laid-back Tom Coughenour as a cross-country and track coach missed him as a football coach and basketball coach who was a fire eater. In 1968, I never dreamed I would even attend his funeral, much less talk at it. One day at practice, we were not having a particularly good practice, and he decided that the chewing out wasn't working, so he was going to take another approach. And his approach was, Clark, as much as you and Ricky Taylor are doing, you might as well be on the sidelines holding hands. Get over there. So we walked over to the sidelines. And we stood there for a second. He said, I said hold hands. So I did the only thing that I felt like I could do at that time, which was to extend my right hand. And for the next hour, we walked up and down the sidelines as if we were hurt and had to help each other up and down the sidelines. I'm scarred. He was furious at a halftime basketball game. He came busted through the doors. The only guy that had played well in the first half was 5 foot 1 inch Greg Bryant. He said if I had 5 Greg Bryants, just 5 Greg Bryants, I could win this basketball game. Roger Brixey, who was 6'2", looked up and said, Coach, who do you reckon would rebound? He laughed about it years later. There was no humor in his eyes at the time. Matter of fact, I thought there was a chance a killing could take place. The next day was the day that he lined us up on the end line of the basketball court and took a basketball and put it at midcourt and paired us off. He said, okay, you two are going. Whoever gets back with the basketball starts the next game. I said, Coach, is everything legal? He said, everything's legal. So we ran to the basketball 2 at a time and proceeded to have the awfulest fight in the Ross A. Robinson small gym you ever saw. And it didn't matter. You were going to start if you got back with the basketball. Because he was teaching us to compete. He was teaching us that if it was worth it, we would do whatever we needed to do. And he was a fire eater. I told him years later, the first 5 times I heard the story about the bumblebee not being able to fly according to scientific knowledge, it excited me. I wanted to spray that dadgum bug. And he quit telling the bumblebee story when he got into coaching cross country full time. And he said he quit telling it because he finally realized that that adrenaline would carry you about 100 yards and there was still 2.9 miles to go. He could adapt with the times and with the people better than anybody I've ever seen. And so then he went to a more motivational type thing that motivated or relaxed his runners. One of his favorites that he came in and told me about was, he said, I told him yesterday, he was laughing when he told this. He said, I told him yesterday, he said, I visited a former runner at the hospital and said he was laying there and said he was dying. And said he was a guy that constantly had a dip of SCO in his mouth. Said he looked up at me. He said, Coach, when times get tough for the runners, I want you to tell them just to remember one thing. I said, what's that, son? He said, tell them to win one for the dipper. That is the corniest thing I have ever heard. And you know, us teachers, we have to have our visual aids. Now this was one of the t-shirts that he came up with. If you're a runner for Coach Coughenour, you remember this. Just looking at it, you're thinking, what in the world? And that's why I said, Coach, what have you put on that shirt? Any runners here remember this? It stood for, if you don't give 100%, you are wasting my time. Go home and play with your mother. I thought that was one of the great ones. He took me to ball games because he knew there wasn't anybody else to take me. We went to the Kettering Sullivan Central opening game of the year when I was in 9th grade. It was the only time I ever saw the PA announcer get a 15-yard unsportsmanlike conduct. I think it was Dale Burns. And we laughed about that for years and years. You did not play Coach Coughenour in a game of horse in the Ross and Robinson gym. That was definitely his home gym. If you went to Ross and Robinson, and you know this, he was the master of the over-the-heat vent shot, the hook from the corner, the bounce from the half line, and his put-out shot, which is still mine, the behind the back, flip through your legs layup, and the drop kick. Anything that was a little bit different. And it's always hard to believe, as solid a person as he was, he loved the different, the offbeat, I don't know if it's a word or not, the quirky. And he associated so well with those guys that were those kind of guys. And it always amazed me as the years went by because he was such a solid, responsible individual. But boy, he would take a renegade in and turn his life around.